Kim, are we live?
We are indeed.
All right, let's get started.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Holger Peterman. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Earth Sciences here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And today I want to ask this very simple question. How old is this dinosaur? And the reason why I want to ask this question is because it's actually not that easy to tell the age, the precise age, and even the relative age of a dinosaur or any fossil vertebrate for that matter. And we're going to look at this specific dinosaur here, Sue, because one, we just recently had Sue on display here as part of a traveling exhibit, and two, because Sue is a representative of a very famous dinosaur species, Tyrannosaurus rex. And usually when I ask, what's your favorite dinosaur, people will tell me it's T-Rex. So how do we normally tell age? Normally, I would just go around and ask people, right? And it's no problem if I ask my family. I can ask my grandmother on the top how old she is. I can ask my mom how old she is, and I can ask my sister how old she is. And as you can see, it's easy to tell that my grandmother is much older than my mom and my sister. But it's difficult to tell, or more difficult to tell, my sister and my mom apart in terms of who's older. And that's a species we're very familiar with, that's humans. A species we're less familiar with would be elephants. They're still mammals, but it's already more difficult to tell which one is the oldest of these three elephants. Right? And on top, that's an old male elephant that just passed away, I think, 2 years ago. In the middle is actually a prime age bull, elephant bull, and on the bottom, that's a young elephant. And there are some features of older mammals that we can use to sort of get an idea which one is the oldest. Mostly wrinkles, right? My grandmother has a few wrinkles, and so has this old elephant bull. But what about species we're not so familiar with, like lizards? And I study lizards a lot, and I wouldn't be able to tell you which one of these three lizards is actually the oldest. And they're all the same species. And that's having all of the features of an animal present, right? It already gets difficult to tell age the less familiar we are with the species in question. So what if we only have bones? Then we cannot look at wrinkles, we cannot look at hair color, we cannot look at all the other things that stand out in older individuals. Here I'm listing a few features that might help us figure out how old Sue in particular was. One is size, then what I call skeletal robustness, and I'll explain what that means in a second. Then we can look at the bones themselves and their surface. We could look at teeth, and then we can look at something really fancy called skeletal chronology. So let's jump right in and look at size. Here are three specimens of Tyrannosaur by size, the smallest on the top, and then Sue is on the bottom. And Sue is one of the largest Tyrannosaurus rex we've ever found. And you can see that the legs are relatively change over with size and presumably with age, that the smallest and likely youngest Tyrannosaur has longer legs than the oldest Sue. So we could rank these by age based on size and allometries, as we call them, the proportions of body parts. But that's can be a false friend. On the right side, you can see two basketball players. One is one of the two tallest basketball players of all times in the NBA, and one is the shortest basketball player of all times in the NBA, Manute Ball and Maxi Bogues. And they are 44% size different, but only 3 years different. That's the same as essentially having this small nanotyrannus type T-Rex and this 10-meter long side by side. They could essentially be the same age. So size can be a false friend. It can help us figure out when we have a kid, maybe, and when we have a really large animal. So let's look at skeletal robustness. And one easy way to describe skeletal robustness is just looking at how massive does a skeleton look, where younger and smaller animals tend to look more gracile, more slender than old and large animals. So Sue is on the bottom, has a big bulky skull, and then on top, that's one of those nanotyrannus types and looks more slender. We can look at other bones in the skeleton. This is the pelvis, and usually what happens over age is that bones fuse together. And we can see that in part in the skull. We can see that in the pelvis here, that on the left side is a nanotyrannus type T-Rex. And there the bones are very much unfused. They're very separate. And in Sue, they are already fused up. They're glued together, so to speak. And the bone that works very well usually in that regard is the vertebrae, and the vertebra of Sue on the bottom right. You cannot tell where the top part and the bottom part come together. And in a young Tyrannosaurus Rex, you would find probably only the bottom part and not the top. Okay, so that's skeletal robustness. Then let's look at bone smoothness, bone surface. And this is on the left, a younger T-Rex or smaller T-Rex, and on the right, Sue again. And when we zoom in on the younger one, you can see all of these little grooves on the bone. The bone is rougher to the feel, to the touch. And that is something that you can find in animals that still grow actively, that grow fast and much. They have this rough bone surface, whereas a bone that is fully formed, fully grown, will have this smooth texture. It's a silky texture that you can see on Sue. So Sue would be ostensibly a fully grown T-Rex. And we can look at teeth. And in mammals, we can use tooth replacement. Like in this elephant jaw, you can see one tooth is in use, and then another tooth comes in. And these replace in a pattern and on a time scale. Now, dinosaurs, they replace their teeth constantly, so we cannot use that. But something about teeth in T-Rex is actually helpful in telling whether Sue is an old T-Rex or a young T-Rex. And we can look at the number of teeth in the lower jaw and the upper jaw. And what we find is that a younger T-Rex will have more teeth actually than an older T-Rex. And that may have to do with changing diet, that you eat larger prey items. So you don't need as many teeth, but you need a large knife, a larger steak knife to cut through your meat. So maybe it's better to have fewer teeth. Okay, and then let's look at this fancy thing called skeletal chronology, which means we're cutting either through a bone or we're drilling a hole in a bone. So you can see here on the top, that's just a standard issue power drill. We drill into the bone, in the middle of the bone where we have a lot of the growth record preserved. And then we make thin sections out of that and look at those thin sections under the microscope. And if we do that with a few specimens of the same species, we can reconstruct how old these animals were, similar to tree ring counting. But we can also tell how much they grew from year to year. And if we do that for T-Rex, then we can see here that we have a lot of T-Rex specimens now. These are just 31 of roughly 50 T-Rex. And we can see that Sue was really old. On the top right, you can see these little lines, and then a thing called EFS, which stands for external fundamental system. But what it is a sign of this animal is fully grown. It's now putting on almost no additional bone mass. So where does Sue fall in this profile? She's in fact the oldest T-Rex that we know. She is 28 years at least. And she is the most fully grown, largest, and ontogenetically most mature T-Rex. So this is how we know how old a dinosaur was. and how old most fossil and in some cases even modern animals would be. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. If you are joining us and you have questions, you can feel free to put those questions into the chats. My name is Jose. I am a science educator at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. So I will be fielding those questions today. I'm monitoring both Facebook and YouTube. All questions are welcome. I also know it's difficult to think of questions off the top of your head. So I have a question for you, Holder. How does knowing the age of a dinosaur help us understand what that dinosaur's life might have been like?
That is an excellent question, and essentially at the core of my primary research interest. Knowing about the age of a dinosaur and how it got to its size and overall physique at that age helps us understand how it interacted with its environment and how the environment may have affected it. You can imagine that you find a really small, like a Mugsy Bogues type T-Rex that is much smaller than Sue, but is at least as old as her. Something must have happened to her or that specific specimen. So that is one important aspect. Another one is knowing how old one dinosaur was and knowing how old more of the same type of dinosaur were lets us understand like how many different age groups would come together in a herd or in a group, and how long would it take them to start reproducing, at what size, and how fast could they grow maximally? All of these important biological questions that also directly reflect behavior and ecology.
Interesting. Very interesting. I'm imagining like the potential of the question around herding dinosaurs. How often do you find juveniles with adults? I know in modern species, a lot of juveniles will move away from herds at a certain age to form their own. So I can imagine that would be very, very informative for understanding dinosaur life cycles.
Exactly.
I have another question for you. I know that there is a lot of research being done as to whether or not dinosaurs were, I suppose the layman's terms are cold or warm blooded. And I know that examining how quickly they reach maturity is critical to answering that question. Have you found any evidence so far in your research to suggest that Sue was a warm blooded or cold blooded creature?
Oh, Sue was warm-blooded, without a doubt, in my opinion. When you look at the bone tissue, so on this last slide, this top right picture, you see all of these white spots, and they are essentially open spaces in the bone. And only fast-growing animals will have these open spaces. And fast growth is essentially the same as being warm-blooded. You need, in order to lay down bone mineral, you need a certain temperature. And so if you can maintain the temperature, you can actually grow at a much higher increment per day and per year.
That's interesting. We have a comment here from Amber Lane. I'm not going to try to pronounce this first word here, but it's an indigenous group of people that had giant lizards stepping on their longhouses. And Amber says it's interesting if perhaps ancestors' native or indigenous knowledge could be integrated into our understandings of these creatures. Sort of to build on that a little bit, I know that a lot of people think of dinosaurs as being a recent type of creature, but obviously humans have been finding fossils throughout the world since there have been humans. Have you ever encountered in your research a myth or a story that seems closely associated with a fossil site or a creature that you've been working with?
Not with a creature that I've been working with, but I'm from Germany, and one of our greatest folk stories is about Siegfried, who slay a dragon. And in that area where he may have slain the dragon, we actually find a lot of elephant bones and other large, not as old as dinosaur, but large mammal bones. And that most certainly has influenced that specific folk myth. And I know that other mythical creatures like chimeras and griffins may have been in part inspired by dinosaur finds and other fossil animal finds. Um, so yeah, the fossil record is probably very strongly interwoven with human mythology through the ages.
Interesting. Very interesting. And folks, if you have any other questions or comments, feel free to put those into the chat. We've got a few minutes left here. We'd be happy to answer as any questions you might have. While we're waiting to see if anybody has any questions, I do have one other question for you, and this is probably a little bit more less research oriented. But what is your favorite dinosaur?
Um, I have two.
Two.
I have two favorite dinosaurs. One because it's just the most amazing dinosaur in the world, called Amargasaurus. That's a sauropod, so a long-necked dinosaur, and it has very long spines coming out of its backbone, so it looks like a dragon, staying with the mythological theme. And the other one is called Opisthocoelicaudia, and it's also a long-necked dinosaur, but it's just the name. I love that name because it's such a tongue twister. It probably took me 15 years just to get it out of properly.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to spell it. That's for sure. All right. Well, I think we're not seeing any other questions. That was very interesting. I mean, I've never really wondered about how old dinosaurs are, but I guess they had to have an age. And it never really occurred to me how knowing their age would inform so much about what their life cycle is like. But it's true for us. I suppose it had to be true for them. So, Holger, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today. I hope I speak for everybody when I say that we really appreciated it. We hope you have a good rest of your day. And you folks, we hope you have a good rest of your day as well. If you like, you can take that survey that was linked in the comments there. That would really help us out. And we hope to see you again soon with Science Division Live. Thank you, everybody.